play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for listening, whether you're listening at 1 p.m. Central on June 15th on 101.1 FM The Answer, Little Rock, Central Arkansas area, or on the online stream at 1011fmtheanswer.com. Or if you're listening delayed by podcast or on YouTube or on Krypton Radio or one of the other ways the show gets out there, I'm just really glad that you're listening. Today's show is mainly an interview with Mike and Elizabeth Stewart about the Victorian Steampunk superhero RPG and their Save for Half podcast. But I also want to tell you about North Texas RPG Con, which I had the pleasure of attending last weekend. But before we get into any of that, I want to make sure that you know today is Free RPG Day at show sponsor Game Goblins. It's a once-a-year event. It's like Free Comic Book Day, but for RPGs. So several friendly local game stores nationwide, including Game Goblins, are participating. You can drop by anytime today while supplies last and get free RPG swag. It might be accessories for RPGs or quick start rules for an RPG you've never had a chance to play, or maybe a new edition of an RPG that you're already familiar with, adventures and modules, and it's just all kinds of cool stuff. So get on over there to Game Goblins. They're also having from 11 till midnight a veritable cornucopia of one-shot RPGs across multiple game types and systems and settings. Just get on over there. It's, no experience required. These games are one-shots with pre-gens. They're for fun to just have a fun day doing RPGs, tabletop RPGs. So get on over there. I'm sure if you get there anytime today, by probably the last round of games will start around 7. But they'll have free swag all day. So get on over there to show sponsor Game Goblins and get your RPG on. Also want to tell you about Little Rock Comic Con. As you know, Shane Plays Geek Talk and Little Rock Comic Con have cross-promoted for several years now, and this year is no different. This year it's going to be Saturday, June 29th at the Benton Event Center in Benton, Arkansas from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Tickets are $10, and kids 8 and under get in free with at least one paid adult. Some of the special guests you'll see there are John Anderson, who's an actor from Guardians of the Galaxy, Bobby Valla, who's a former toy designer from Hasbro, and Robbie Musso, who is an artist from IDW Comics. And there'll be plenty of other vendors, comic book vendors, toy vendors. Last couple of years, I've gotten some good retro RPG products there. So come on out, check out Little Rock Comic Con, Saturday, June 29th, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Benton Event Center. And the 22nd, the Saturday before, I'll be having event promoter and coordinator Mike Tinnell back on. Usually the week or the Saturday before the con, we talk about, all the cool stuff and have geeky news and maybe have one of the guests on or more that from the con. So make sure to check that out. Little Rock Comic Con, June 29th, Benton Event Center in Benton, Arkansas. Okay, before we get to that interview with Mike and Elizabeth Stewart of Victorious RPG and the Save for Half podcast, I want to tell you a little bit about North Texas RPG Con. So in early June, when the stars align, North Texas RPG Con is poured like fine enchanted wine. Now, really, given its old school roots and OSR focus, it, probably needs to be poured like mead or grog or ale, but to be quite honest, none of those rhymed with a line. So we'll go with fine enchanted wine, and in your mind you can give that wine as much of a kick as you want it to. But rolling dice since 2009, North Texas RPG Con in Dallas is part of the trifecta of must-attend old-school RPG conventions along with GaryCon and GameholeCon. While mega conventions such as Gen Con have attendance of over 60,000, these old-school conventions are practically intimate. GameholeCon recently had 5,000 attendees, GaryCon a little over 2,000, and North Texas this past weekend was somewhere north of 400. In fact, I talked with Doug Ray, I hope I'm saying that last name correctly, of North Texas RPG Con, and said, hey, would you like to come on the show and help promote your con? And he said, actually, we don't want it to get any bigger than 500, which, personally, I'm happy to hear that. And these old school gaming conventions attract a type of gamer that is interested in the classics. I mean, literally the classic games themselves, OD&D, BXD&D, BECME D&D, AD&D First Edition, Tunnels and Trolls, Chainmail. If you think of these classic games, and then also the newer, what's known as the old school Renaissance, OSR, which are newer games that capture the feel or possibly the mechanics or both of the older games. Some people kind of cut off about 1985. That's your mileage may vary, and show sponsor Troll Lord Games with Castles and Crusades was one of the, if not the first OSR game published. As we talk with Mike and Liz later in the show, Steve Chenault and company were first out the gate. So also, given the tabletop RPG's wargaming roots, you'll see some wargaming in the mix, including, as I mentioned, classic Chainmail. There were some other war games I saw throughout last weekend that, I don't even know what they were, but they were, Roman battles and tanks and fantasy stuff and multi-level craziness. It looked really cool. So any RPG game is welcome, but, the focus is on the old school. And then on a side note, I'd like to see Carl Heil's Arkansas RPG Con, who I've, cross-promoted with the last couple of years and we'll be doing again this year. I'd actually like to see Arkansas RPG Con make it into this quote-unquote must-attend group of old-school conventions. This November will be its third year. It's growing quickly, and it definitely has an old-school OSR focus. In fact, Carl, among other things, is a co-host on the Save or Die podcast, and he runs a mean game of BXD&D, and at North Texas RPG Con, he did this Discos and Dragons, where I think everything about the game had to be 1970s D&D, like from the minis to the maps to the mechanics and everything. And evidently, from what I heard, that was a lot of fun and well attended. But if Arkansas RPG Con makes it in, then it would be a quadfecta of conventions and not a trifecta. And quite honestly, there would be debates on which is more fun to say, because, this is the gaming world. But back to North Texas RPG Con, this event is right in my sweet spot of what I want in an RPG convention. It's not hard to get to. It's roughly 5 hours drive from Little Rock. It's old school focused. It's large enough to have a wide variety of games to play and vendors to browse, but small enough that, again, it feels intimate. There's very much a family reunion feel. And the special guests are indeed special, yet no one is on a pedestal, and there are no prima donnas. Everyone's hanging out, having a good time as fellow gamers. You don't have to go to some kind of moderated panel to catch a glimpse of your favorite RPG industry great. You'll probably end up at a gaming table with them or chatting with them at the bar. And it's casual. Everyone is there to have fun. You probably won't even realize you're sitting next to a well-known personality unless you look at their name card that's hanging on their lanyard, or someone points it out to you later. That actually happened with me, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. And just so you'll get an idea, here are a few of the special guests from this year's con, which ran from I think June 6th through June 9th, Thursday, June 6th through Sunday, June 9th, I think were the dates. So David Zeb Cook, Darlene, that's what she goes by. She's an artist, and she's known for her maps for early D&D. Jeff D, who's a big name for me. Jeff Easley and Larry Elmore. In fact, Jeff Easley and Larry Elmore, their booths were right next to each other, and it was just fascinating to watch them talk. And, I've got a picture of Larry Elmore looking at a piece of art that Jeff Easley was working on. Alex Kammer, who does Gamehole Con. Timothy Kask, who's a name from early D&D, or old TSR. Manda, also known as Talzamir, who is a special guest in her own right and also the partner of Jeff D. Steve Marsh, old school TSR. Errol Otis. Steve Perrin, creator of RuneQuest and other things. Errol Otis, of course, is famous for his art and older early D&D. John Peterson of Playing at the World, who wrote Playing at the World and is no stranger to this show. Stefan Picorni of Dwarven Forge and the Dwarvenaut documentary. He's been on the show, a lot of fun. Of course, Mike and Elizabeth Stewart, who we'll hear from here in a moment. And Dr. Dennis Sustera, who created Bunnies and Burrows, which was well attended, the sessions at North Texas RPG Con. And he had an advanced copy Bunnies and Burrows 3rd edition with him that's not out yet. So that's just some examples. There were other special guests there. So in addition, some of the top RPG collectors there. Alex Kammer, who's one of the special guests. Not only does he run Gamehole Con, but he's one of the top collectors, RPG collectors out there. Another is Bill Leinhart, who has the largest fantasy RPG collection in the world. I've been collecting retro RPGs for the past couple of years, and I've really had my eyes open to how big this scene actually is. And I want to give a special shout out to John Peterson. He introduced me with much more praise than I deserve to several folks at the bar one evening as I was waiting on some food after a long, amazing day of gaming and hanging out with my tribe. And many of the folks that he introduced me to will now be future guests on this show as a result. So thank you, John. It was a pleasure meeting you in person after having you on the show so many times and talking on Twitter. So I want to give a few memories. It's been almost a week and I still have that sort of nice afterglow you get after a really good trip or visit with friends and family and that sort of thing. But, I've got to say that Jeff D for me is one of the big ones. Not only, Villains of Vigilantes is my red box. It was the first RPG, full box set RPG that I ever owned. It was the second RPG I ever played. The first was Traveler. I messed around with D&D off and on, and I got into D&D heavily later, but at first it was basically Villains of Vigilantes. That was my jam. And between that and, his work as a TSR staff artist, he's just, Jeff D's big for me. And in fact, I've had Jeff D and Jack Herman on the show twice talking about Villains of Vigilantes 3.0 Mighty Protectors. And, I've been doing radio and podcasting for about 5 years now. I've done a lot of public speaking throughout my life, and I generally don't have stage fright or get tongue-tied around people. But both of my Villains of Vigilante shows, I fanboyed. Anytime I listened to those, I fell apart and I lost my objectivity and composure. And then when I met Jeff D in person this past weekend at North Texas, it was the same thing. I'm talking to everybody else there and I'm like, hey, what's going on? But I'm just like, hey, Jeff. I'm a timid 13-year-old, just having a fanboy meltdown. But luckily, and fortunately, he was very kind, and we actually ended up chatting quite a bit throughout the con. So I was able to get past that and just kind of hang out and chat with Jeff as a person. And again, that's one of the cool things about this con is everybody who's there is there to have fun and, run games, playing games and to see their family, their gaming family, or maybe their literal family. And in fact, on my 47th birthday, which was Friday, not only did I get to play in a Mighty Protectors Villains and Vigilantes session run by Manda But I also got to chat with Jeff, just hang out in the evening and chat with him for an hour or two about all kinds of stuff. Not just Villains and Vigilantes. He's just chatting, and that was extremely special to me to be able to do that. Especially on my birthday. I mean, it just happened to work out that way. I got to play Villains and Vigilantes for the first time in years. So my inner 11, 12, 13-year-old, whatever, was just loving that. Another thing I also got to play in a game Saturday evening, that Jeff ran. It was a BX, D&D game that, you were basically fantasy superheroes, and that was a lot of fun. And I just, here I am, I'm like, I'm in a game run by Jeff D again, who out of everybody there, Jeff D's my, probably the biggest for me personally. I love his art, I love his, Village Vigilantes, everything else. So I'm in a game that he's running, and, I got busted for using a dice roller app because I got down there. I was all, I had all my stuff together. I always have a gaming bag with me with everything in it. And somehow, don't ask me how, I went down there to the game and did not have my dice on me. So I kind of meekly a couple of times mentioned, is anybody got any dice? Nobody heard me. And I didn't want to, I was like, whatever. So I kind of pulled out my dice roller app on my phone, and we hadn't been playing very long. I think it was the very first dice roll. And Jeff was like, dude, are you using a dice roller, dude? And everybody at the table was like, oh, come on, man. I was like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. So anyway, somebody threw me some dice, and at the break, I went up and got my own. So there you go. And then also I mentioned earlier, you may be, playing in a game next to somebody you don't even know it. Well, there was this guy sitting next to me, and he was really funny. And he had kind of a dry wit, and we were just kind of joking back and forth. I found out later, somebody's like, dude, it was Steve Perrin, the guy who created RuneQuest, right? And I had no clue. And in fact, while we were playing, he did some kind of thief check that you had to use a percentile dice. And he just made this casual comment. It's like, yeah, it was stuff like that we wanted to get into RuneQuest. And I just didn't, because RuneQuest is, I believe, all percentile dice. So, didn't even pick up on it. But the last thing I got to say, that was cool about being in Jeff's game was at one point I had my Moldvay basic D&D rulebook open, and there's one of his famous pieces of art. It's, that female warrior, I believe Iron Wolf is her name. And so I'm looking down at that, and I look up, and there's Jeff D running the game. And that was just a very nice moment. So that's the kind of thing that, you could do at these cons. It's just very cool. So, a couple of other fun memories. So another cool moment, I was at the bar I was the same night I was waiting on my food, and John Peterson was introducing me to some folks. Well, David Zeb Cook, who is a big name in, gaming, early TSR, wrote Oriental Adventures, even though, Gary Gygax's name is on the cover. Well, he comes walking up, and he's like, man, I just ran a game for like 16 people. It's fun, but I'm tired. And somebody's like, you want a beer? He's like, yeah. So they bought him a beer, and he's just drinking a beer and hanging out. Well, two people in front of him, they both collect RPGs, and I call it proactive archaeology. They collect materials surrounding the history of RPGs, and they both start talking about the Zeb Cook materials they've collected, not involving the stuff he's written for RPGs, but like work memos or contractual, paperwork about the work he's done and that sort of thing. And he's just sitting there hanging out, drinking a beer, and so this is going on, and they're both, well, I've got this, and well, I've got that, and I've got this, and it wasn't, it was a very friendly conversation. And they were both, enjoying, talking about this, and my food came, and I said, I will kick myself, if I don't ask this. And I said, Mr. Cook, I said, I got to ask you, what does it feel like to have people talking about, the minutia of previous employment, when at the time you probably didn't think it was a big deal when all that was happening. And now it's being talked about in like hushed, odd tones. And he kind of takes a drink of his beer, and he goes, it's weird. And I went, okay. And I said, was that good weird or bad weird? and he kind of slams another drink of his beer and he's like, it's good weird. So that was cool. And I said, well, thank you very much. And I kept going. And, I bought a copy of Oriental Adventures at the con, but never quite had it on me. When I also ran into to Zeb Cook. That would have been a nice signature to get. I did almost, as I was leaving on Sunday, I almost took him out with an overloaded baggage cart, but luckily I was able to stop in time, and I kind of shouted over my shoulder that I almost took out a legend. And, I would have been the most hated man in RPG games probably, but he just kind of left and kept going. You just see cool little stuff. You'll be walking around at the bar or the restaurant and people will be, busting out a fantasy trip game, or whatever. It's not just the official scheduled stuff. I mean, there's just gaming and camaraderie and fellowship and fun just happening all over the place. The hotel was wonderful. Another nice memory was Raven Metcalf, who's a young artist. Ran into her on the elevator going up to my room. And I said, hey, I've seen some of your art and I really like it. And somebody else standing in there was like, oh, that was your art? Yeah. And complimented her. And the door opened and she literally, it was so sweet, went skipping down the hallway to her room. And that was just a real nice moment. And she posted later on the Facebook group that something like she's in love with North Texas RPG Con, or she has a crush on the con or something like that. And that was nice. There was also live music every night from a trio of musicians called Threadneedle Street. And they would play, I guess, what I would call Renaissance Fair music, the kind of thing you would expect to hear at a Renaissance fair or at a medieval town or something like that. And you'll hear a little bit of that music during the interview with Mike and Elizabeth Stewart. Also, again, there was just great vendors for RPG collecting. My budget died a slow, horrible death and was left far in the rearview mirror as my self-control just completely fell apart. But I mean, there was some great stuff there that I had to get. Another, you'll see game designers, get together and they're chatting enthusiastically and you're like, well, they must be talking about the secrets of RPG design. And then you realize they're just enthusiastically chatting about their characters in City of Heroes that has suddenly reappeared on private servers. And a lot of people are playing it, the MMO about superheroes. And then my last memory I want to share, I was at one of the booths looking through some retro RPG stuff. And a guy was standing at the end looking at stuff as well. And he had a button on that said, I love Thaco. And this 15-year-old running the booth said, what's Thaco? And we were both like, shh, don't say that so loud around here. So then we told him about Thaco, and he had a lot of questions about old school. He's an RPG player, but he had a lot of questions about old school RPGs and how to GM and how to get a group together and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun. All right, so that's a good point to kind of step away and give out some show notes and give some love to some sponsors. We always appreciate our sponsors for the show. And after that, we'll have that interview with Mike and Elizabeth Stewart, the Victorious RPG and of the Save for Have podcast. And just these really, really cool folks, lovely couple. And I just really enjoyed talking with them. So I know that you'll enjoy that interview. But first, we are a geek talk radio show, but we also go out as a podcast. And if you're listening to the podcast version or on Krypton Radio or anything like that, the show notes for today's show will be at shaneplays.com. That's ShanePlays.com. And last week's show is archived on the blog. That was episode 187. That was Earthworm Jim with creator Doug TenNapel, and that guy was fascinating. It's a great show to listen to, and the podcast version has extra content that was not included in the radio broadcast. I mentioned the podcast. It goes out on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, SoundCloud, YouTube, and more. And last but never, ever least, Shane Plays is also carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is SciFi for your Wi-Fi. Are you a fan of thrilling adventure, daring suspense, and just a touch of romance? Cursova has you covered. Since 2016, Cursova has been publishing the very best in contemporary fantasy and science fiction, retro pulp, and for you D&D gamers, Appendix N style fiction. Based in Little Rock, you can pick up their flagship magazine locally at Michael Tierney's The Comic Book Store on Treasure Hill or Collector's Edition on JFK in North Little Rock. Swing by one of Michael's stores and pick up an issue or find them on Amazon. CIRSOVA, Cursofa Magazine. Check them out today.
Comic book lovers, visit thewildstars.com today. From the mind of author and comic book industry expert Michael Tierney, it's not just a comic book, it's a comic book novel. The Wild Stars is sci-fi and so much more. Learn the explanations behind UFOs and space gods. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is the region of the Milky Way galaxy known as the Wild Stars. We guarantee you've never read anything like it. The complete comic book novel took 20 years to tell, with one reviewer noting, the story of the Wild Stars stretches ambitiously across space and time, from small-town murders to the destruction of planets, with every event given multiple layers of meaning. If you haven't read The Wild Stars, you're missing out. Visit thewildstars.com today. The die is cast. Plunge into worlds of fantastic adventure where dragons lie and the undead stalk the shades of your mind's imagines. Where creatures of legend plunder wealth through the horror of their passage. Monsters grim and foul hold the ecstasy of gold and the renown of glory. All this and more awaits you and your friends in the unlimited, fantastic world of the Castles and Crusades role-playing game from Troll Lord Games. Visit your friendly local game store or trolllord.com to get your copy today. A rules-light, adaptable game that has stood the test of time. 12 years in constant publication with no new additions, Castles and Crusades is the original, easy-to-play attribute check system. Join us and unleash your imagination. Visit your friendly local game store or trolllord.com to get your copy of Castles and Crusades today. Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.
Welcome back to Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. Here's the interview with Mike and Elizabeth Stewart of the Victorian superhero Steampunk RPG, interview that I recorded last weekend at North Texas RPG Con. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed talking with them. They're real cool folks, and their game sounds great. All right, so I'm here at North Texas RPG Con with Mike and Elizabeth, a.k.a. Liz Stewart. We're going to be talking about a couple of things. They were gracious enough to offer their time while they're here having fun, and this is an amazing convention. I'm going to spend some time in the show in general talking about that. Just when I do put the radio show together. But we're specifically going to be talking today about their Victorious tabletop RPG, and I'll let them explain what that is. I won't steal their thunder. And I just recently learned that they have a podcast called Save for Half, not Save or Die. That's Carl Heil. Save for Half.
Well, it's kind of murky because we were on Save or Die years ago.
Oh, really?
And we left to make Save for Half. And so DM Carl is in Save or Die now.
Right.
And
that upstart.
Yeah. Well, he's awesome, though.
I like Carl.
Young whippersnapper.
Yeah, Carl and Crispy have been doing a great job keeping the show going, and we still listen to it, even though we're not on it anymore.
That's great. Yeah, I had DM Carl and DM Crispy on a few months. It's the only OSR dedicated show I've had where I was just like, what is the OSR? Mm-hmm. Try to explain to my listeners. But anyway, so you're I'll ask you, would you describe yourself as a husband and wife game design couple, or how do you describe yourselves?
I think so. I tend to be more into the rules,
Yeah.
but Liz really helps with the playtest and fleshing out ideas. Frankly, I'd like to put her name on more of the stuff I publish, but she gets grumpy when I do that.
Oh, really? So you
Well, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to making the rules, he's doing 95% of the work, and I just kind of feel like, I guess, some sort of imposter. You know, it's like, yeah, I want my name on the inside cover, even though I barely did anything. You know.
Except, anybody who's designed rules knows.
Right.
You come, this is a great idea, and then you give it to somebody with an objective eye, and they go, this is stupid.
No, it's terrible. What are you
That's
thinking?
what, and that's what she does
And
for me.
anybody that's creative, you depend on real feedback, because so many people that they're just trying to encourage you. Oh, that's great, and you're like, okay, it's good then, and then it's not, because they're trying to be nice or spare your feelings. But real feedback is so critical to people, that are creating anything. So I'm going to back up a second and do what we call in the business icebreaker. I do a little icebreaker. What are you reading there, Liz? I see you have a book here right next to you.
I am reading a Mercedes Lackey book called A Study in Sable, and it kind of goes with Victorious in a way because it takes place in a literary 19th century. John Watson and Sherlock Holmes are characters in the book.
Right.
And so that kind of storyline and genre have always been, big favorites of mine. And Mike will frequently say, it's because of me. I am to blame for Victorious. Again.
It's true.
So,
story.
So, which teases us a little bit that it's kind of a Victorian setting, right?
Uh-huh.
So we'll get to that. We're doing the big tease.
Uh-huh.
So we'll get to that here in a second. So, Mike, are you reading anything right now that you want to? Or have you read anything lately that you like?
I've been reading a lot of superhero novels.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, especially now that I've been doing, writing several adventures for Victorious.
Mm-hmm.
My best influence is either superhero fiction or Victorian steampunk.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say I've been reading a series by April Daniels called Dreadnought.
Now, is that Victorian steampunk?
That's superhero.
That's superhero?
It's modern.
Okay.
It actually deals with the problems of a transgender superhero.
Oh, okay.
And I found the idea fascinating and really enjoyed it.
And what was the name of that again for the listeners?
Dreadnought,
okay.
by April Daniels.
Okay.
And as far as steampunk, the latest I've been reading is a series called Warp. I forget who wrote it though, but it involves both steampunk science and time travel.
Cool.
I'm a historian. I teach history at a local college, so I really love alternate history stuff or time travel stories.
Now that you mention that, it's never occurred to me, but I guess H.G. Wells' The Time Machine was a Victorian era story. It wasn't steampunk, I don't guess, but it was Victorian era.
Not intentionally steampunk,
Right.
Yeah. It was just science. Like the Him and Vern, it was just science.
Right.
And it was Liz's fault. Well, we'll get to that later.
It's all Liz's fault. So I've actually been revisiting some superhero fiction that I read quite a bit of it in the 90s, and now I'm revisiting it, and it's the Wild Cards series of novels that George R.R. Martin edits. Each novel is most of them are anthologies of short stories.
It was a shared universe.
It was a shared universe.
Like Thieves' World.
Mm-hmm. And it was it's actually some pretty good stuff in there. But what got me revisiting that is I personally really like what M. Night Shyamalan, I call it the not quite superverse. So Unbreakable, Split, and Glass. I don't know if you've seen any of those, but they're really good. They're superhuman, but they're superhuman between, like, right on the edge of realistic levels, right? So it's like you might have somebody who's really, really super strong, but they're not tossing around cars and tanks and stuff like that.
It's Luke Cage, not Superman.
Well, it's probably not even that level, but it's supernatural, but it's like there's this tension. It's right in between being. It's like somebody who could be as strong as the person who has the adrenaline to get the car off their kid, but they have it all the time. But yet they're not, lifting 10 tons or something like that.
Gotcha.
And you have another guy that, the mind over matter, he can kind of bulk himself up and be all crazy. So there's just this really interesting tension to me between, it's not like comic book super, but it's beyond regular life too. So, and that kind of got me back into reading wild cards, because a lot of the wild cards are like that too. They're not
what would be called low to mid power.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so anyway, so that's interesting that you missed. And is there any other superhero fiction that you would recommend that maybe me or somebody else might want to write or read?
I can't remember the author, but it's called Confessions of a D-List Supervillain.
Okay.
Which is a great series.
Right.
It starts with this guy who gets screwed over by a big company and decides to take revenge by becoming a minor supervillain.
And he ends up being like a stilt man or something?
Sort of. Yeah. And yet he ends up being the only one able to save the world.
Ah, I like it.
And thus he kind of gets stuck into being an even more reluctant hero.
Okay.
And his trying to go from villain to hero is funny, but it's got some really poignant moments in it.
I like
too.
it. That sounds really good. I guess I didn't realize that superhero fiction was a big, or is enough a thing to be called a genre. I didn't realize there was that much of it out there.
There's more of it than a lot of people think.
Right.
I mean,
what's that series? The superheroes in the zombie apocalypse?
X-Heroes.
X-Heroes, yeah.
See, I haven't heard of any of this stuff.
I think it's either Peter Klein's or Ernest Klein's. One of them wrote that, the other one wrote Ready Player One.
Ernest Klein wrote Ready Player One.
Okay, then
Peter
this would be
Klein.
Peter Klein's.
Okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah.
I'm definitely in a superhero fiction kick right now. So, and I hear that it's either Hulu or Amazon. They're doing a Wild Cards TV series. I guess because George R.R. Martin did Game of Thrones and that went crazy. So now they're going after that. So.
Well, I'd give it a shot.
Yeah.
I that might be hard to really catch.
Well, the problem that they'll have, in my opinion, is they're gonna have a hard time finding a narrative, a consistent narrative thread, because Wild Cards jumps all over the place. I mean, it's jumps decade to decade and character to character. There's some ongoing, but anyway. So I'm sensing a possible pattern here. So Liz loves the Victorian and steampunk, and then you love it too, but you also love superheroes, and then boom, we have Victorious. So tell us, what is the setup on Victorious?
Well, we already covered it's your fault. So
yeah, it's all Liz's fault.
It all started when I was running a quote-unquote normal modern superhero game, and I decided, what's more superhero than time travel, right? Well, what if some modern superheroes found themselves inexplicably back in the 19th century, a literary 19th century? So you've got Holmes, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and all that going on.
So everybody's headcanon of what the 19th century is, not the literal 19th century.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
Cool. I like it.
And they don't know how they got there. They don't know how to get back. What do? And much as comic books inspire, quote-unquote, the superheroes of our generation, at least, that's how they always explain it. These initial heroes going around, actually it was an equal group of heroes and villains that found themselves back there, and it's their fights that then inspired the locals there, when they got superpowers, to start dressing in outfits and beating the crap out of people. So
what is the level of... probably the only Victorian steampunk that I have a lot of experience with is William Gibson and Bruce Sterling wrote a book in the 90s. It was called The Difference Engine. So that's my main experience with that part of the genre. Is that, I mean, how does that kind of relate to the level of technology? Or, you know what, there may be people listening to this who don't know what steampunk is. So what is steampunk? How would you define it?
Steampunk is a reimagining of the 19th century, or to put it simply, it's 19th century science fiction plus. It takes the technology that Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and stuff imagined and makes that the baseline of activity. And it's still, and the punk part of it covers the old cyberpunk idea of dark cities, oppressed workers, which is definitely Victorian.
Right. Rage Against the Machine.
Rage Against the Machine, evil corporations or uncaring aristocrats causing misery, and of course there's sexism, imperialism, and all that rolled into it as well to fight.
So what? Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Like you said, it's really is counted as either from Sterling's Difference Engine, or some people kick it as far back as Michael Moorcock's Nomads of Time.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I mean, I'm familiar with Elric, but that's about the extent of my Michael Moorcock. I'm not familiar with that. What was the name of that again?
The series is called The Nomads of Time, and it basically deals with a fellow that gets thrown back. Or actually a Victorian who gets thrown to a quote-unquote modern day, but it was a modern day where World War I never happened. So Victorian quote-unquote culture just continued on, and science developed in a STEAM technology vein.
Yeah, because as awful as war is, it generally pushes technology forward, right? And I'm not saying we should have war for technology. I'm just saying.
Oh God, no.
It's something. It's usually a result.
It's an unfortunate result, but it is a result.
Right.
Yeah.
So what? I'm going to throw this one at Liz with your love of Victoria. What are the? I'm trying to think what dates roughly equate to the Victorian era, like late 1800s to early 19. I wouldn't even.
Well, I suppose if you're going to be literal, the Victorian era would be during Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria's
yeah,
right. Okay,
her reign and up until she died.
So that's 1837 to 1901.
But to be fair, a lot of steampunk stuff, you can kind of edge into the beginning of the Edwardian era, because a lot of the same things were still going on in society, and you can get away with moving into the early 1900s a lot of times. But I would say if you're going to be a real stickler about it, it would be during the reign of Queen Victoria.
So what do you ever define in the setting for Victorious what actual decade or year, or do you just leave it very loose, like we're in the Victorian era?
It kind of defaults to the late 1880s.
Okay.
But there's plenty there to say you can kick it back as far as 1830, or I've had people running Victorious games that told me about it that have gone back to the American Revolution and as far forward as either, the 1920s or even today.
There was I'm just now thinking, now I'm starting to think of all the steampunk stuff that I kind of know. That there was who's the guy that did Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, and Miyazaki. Mm-hmm. He did it. It was called like Steam Boy, or do you know what I'm talking about? There was an anime that it's kind of.
There have been several. There's
Blue Water.
Yeah, Nadia and the Secret of Blue Water. And I've got a set of Japanese manga books called The Steam Detective, and it is very steampunk in and of itself, but with an anime sort of twist to it. Oh gosh, there's
in the back of the rule book, the Victorious rule book, I give like 18 pages worth of a bibliography of books, movies, from both the period and today, novels or history books, and I annotate them all.
So that would be roughly, there's a famous, I can't remember if it was in the Player's Handbook or the DM's Guide.
The Appendix N? Appendix
N. So it's like your equivalent of Appendix N.
Only I actually annotate it because, titles and stuff are great.
Oh, here's the Warp series. Ian Colfer.
Ian Colfer, that's Colfer, right, yeah.
Let's see what else. I'm seeing what I recognize in here.
And just remember, we made that list back when the book was first ready to be published, so it is already
4 or 5 years old.
Several years out of date. There's a lot of things that we could put in there now that just weren't around at the time.
So what? That leads into another good question. What was the year that Victorious was first published?
published, it was 2017.
Okay, but you wrote it
2007.
Okay, so, well, all right, so that's going to be my next point. How did you get from writing it to publishing it, and then, through Trollord Games, which you get, just for transparency, Trollord Games is a sponsor of the show. That's not why you're on the show. This is interesting to me, but I just want to be clear on that with listeners. But it's I wanted to drill down on one more thing on Steampunk. It's not just steam engines and whatnot. When was Charles Babbage's computer?
That was 1820s.
So they literally they didn't have digital technology as far as like chips and this and that, but they had the basic math. I mean, they had computers basically that
they could create with a steam engine a very primitive computer.
Right. Yep. So, it's not just trying to give people more of an idea of what, and I remember in the Difference engine, they basically had monitors with resolution by flipping tiles when they wanted to display something. So you had a grid of tiles and each individual tile could be flipped, and it was kind of like a monitor, but it was all analog, right? So,
right.
Yeah. All right. So let's, we've got a Victorian setting, a fictional Victorian. It's like all the things we think of in fiction, and Sherlock Holmes. You said Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mm-hmm. Is it all that?
Invisible Man. Captain Nemo.
Right. The Nautilus. All that cool stuff. And then, but some superheroes from the modern times and villains ended up back then, and then through their actions led to an era of people becoming heroes, right? Being inspired or villains.
Having supernatural powers,
and that cool, and all that stuff. And I see, you have several examples in here. There was I was just looking, I saw like the Jolly Roger and some other...
Count Dracula.
Different stuff.
Baba Yaga, one of my faves.
And what's cool is, you have Baba Yaga, did you say that?
Yeah, Baba Yaga.
Yeah.
I love Baba Yaga. She's awesome.
Yes. I was always fascinated with her from Baba Yaga's dancing hut or something, that spell from D&D.
The chicken hut. Yep.
Yeah, the chicken hut. So, but I know that she's like way beyond D&D, it's folklore and myth that goes way back past that. So you got that. Now, one thing that I don't get the sense, either reading about Victorious or flipping through the book or talking to people who played it, it doesn't have the cynical tone of, say, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic book. Would you say that
I try to keep a balance.
Okay.
There's a section in the book called Victoria's Secret, the dark side of Victorian life, that I try to honestly purport, that this wasn't an idyllic time, no matter what you see in a movie. It
has a romantic vibe about it.
Right.
But yeah, human nature is human nature, and it had a dark underbelly.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. But yeah, there are plenty of other games. Ghost of Albion comes to mind, and Victoriana, that really work the darkness of it. And that's perfectly cool. I have something in Victorious called Chronicle Alignments, which kind of gives a shorthand of what kind of game you can play. Most things are gilded, which is, you've got some good, some bad, some grays. But if you want to play a grim campaign things are just dark and, like Penny Dreadful, you can do that.
Well, like the tone of... Now, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie has quite a different tone from the comic book.
Oh, yeah.
The comic book is like, okay, we're gonna fight for old Blighty or whatever, but we're all basically scumbags. But we're gonna, for whatever our motivations are, we're gonna fight for king and queen or country or whatever.
Either villains or damaged people.
Yeah, very damaged people. Yeah, the Invisible Man in those comic books is just creepy. Yeah. And of course the movie version, they were more kind of like the Avengers of the Victorian era or something. But anyway, moving on. What led to the inspiration for writing this in the first place?
Well, Liz and I both started with Castles and Crusades,
okay.
Also put out by Trollord Games.
Sure.
When it first was being playtested back in 2001.
Yeah, they were one of the first.
They were the first retro clone.
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely. I think them and they were the first retro clone, but them and Paizo were the first to really jump on the open gaming
using
license.
the OGL
right,
for more than just putting out 3E product.
Yeah. Right, and Paizo went one direction, and then basically Castles of Crusades was OSR before the OSR existed. Right, so
they were the forerunners. I think there were a lot of people who would have liked to, jump in and make an OSR at the time, but so many people were scared of, lawsuits from Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, and Trollord took that very first leap to see, okay, we're going to dip our toe in, and when everybody else saw that they weren't getting into trouble using the OGL for that purpose, then that's when you got all of the other retro clones.
Jumped in.
Yeah, Osric and the others, but, Castles and Crusades, they were the ones that were willing to take the first risk. Yeah. And everybody else, once they found out it was safe to go in the water, we all started jumping in.
Yeah. And Trollord Games is still there. There's still, there's been a lot of companies and come and go, but they're still trucking. In fact, they're expanding in a lot of ways with the products they're putting out.
I think the CNC Player's Handbook is on its 7th printing.
Yeah, it's on 7th printing. They're doing, of course, they have Victorious, Amazing Adventures, and now they're doing a version of Amazing Adventures that's 5th edition, but they're not getting rid of the Sage engine. They're just getting all these different stuff. So it's really cool.
Arguably, 5e emulated a few things from Castles and Crusades.
Yeah,
so
I've had a couple of fair.
Yeah, I've had a couple of interesting discussions with Steve about that. So Steve Chenault. So.
That's the two-edged sword of the OGL.
Right.
I mean, that's how it works.
Yeah, but they're great guys over there at Trollord Games. So, how did you two end up in the playtest for Castles of Crusades?
Well, at the time there was it still is a forum called Dragon's Foot at dragonsfoot.org.
That's come up on more than one interview.
Yeah, and it's predominantly first edition AD&D, but it pretty much covers all the old out-of-print stuff. And it started around 2001, and we were on board there because we loved the old versions of the games and didn't see a problem with them. And we were there talking, and Trollord eventually came over and said, hey, we're looking at playtesting something that we're going to try to do our best to emulate the old style of play. And so a lot of us went over there and, did the playtest. And
fun.
Next thing you know, Castles and Crusades comes out. I did some contributing work for all 3 of the books and did a couple of modules.
Nice. Okay.
And anyway, at the time, he had started a magazine called Journal of the Crusader. And it was basically, emulating the old Dragon magazine, but trying to cover all sorts of RPGs, not just Trollord product. Anyway, Liz and I had been playing with the whole Victorious concept, and back in the 80s, Dragon Magazine used to publish these really, really small role-playing games, like 12 pages or something.
Okay.
And it's part of the magazine, so I pitched to Steve, well, you mind if I just slap together a quick little mini role-playing game?
So Victorious has been kicking around the concept since
03, 04.
Okay.
Yeah, it was finished in 07.
Okay.
And he said, sure, but why don't you just make a full game out of it? Okay.
Yeah, sure, why not?
So I spent a couple of years playtesting, getting everything together, and, I submitted it, and there were a lot of various sundry problems. I mean, Trollord is a great company, but they're not huge.
No, they're not. They don't try to be. One of the reasons they've survived, and not only survived, but done well, is that they don't try to be huge. They do what they do, and that's it. Yeah.
And anyway, so when I put together Victorious, we came to an agreement that Trollord would publish it for me. And of course, since it wasn't a fully proprietary product, it obviously took second place to the bread and butter of the company, and nobody can fault them for that.
Right.
And there were, some headaches on art-wise as time went on, and it took a while, but we finally got the game out.
Nice. So you had basically your finished product around 2007, but you had, and you're talking about art and all these. I mean, there's so much that goes into putting a good RPG product out. It's not just drafting the rules. You want the layout to be nice. Like you've got the nice filigree on the corners of the pages here, and you have art that matches in this cover. All right, so you got the book out. In how's it been since the book's come out? Do you feel like that you've had some pretty good engagement from players?
I think so. I think, obviously the idea of Victorian steampunk superheroes is a bit of a niche. It's not going to sweep the gaming world,
right.
But that's okay. I think the people who are into it really enjoy it. They enjoy, tweaking the system, and that's something I try really hard to point out to them, because when I've done Q&As and stuff online, you go, well, in the game, if I want to do this, how will the rules let me do that? You bought it.
Yeah.
It's your game.
Yeah.
You make it however you want. I may not agree with it, but
right.
It doesn't matter. You bought it.
Well, there is a certain type of player, though, that they want to make sure, it's like, I'm not accidentally breaking the game by, so they're wanting the official,
Right. Well, that's that whole idea of game balance.
Yeah.
And I think to a large degree that's sophistry. I mean, it's...
Okay.
You can unbalance any game at any
right.
time.
Right.
Now, if people ask me questions, I try to answer them, but I always try to, preface that with, in my home game,
right.
I would do it like this.
Right.
But it's
you
up
do
to
it however you want. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what I noticed. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he answers all the D&D 5e questions on Twitter and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll always say, rules is written this, rules is interpreted this, but do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah, do whatever you want. Is what it comes down to at the end of the day. Liz, what is your favorite part, I guess, of maybe not the rules, but the setting or the feel of the game? Like, do you have something that just really stands out to you as your favorite thing?
Well, my favorite part is, quite honestly, the literary aspect of it. Since the game began with Mike running a game for, my characters are the ones that found themselves going back in time, and they come from this world, where Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character.
Right.
And so they now find themselves in a time and place where he is real. And so that is the part that I have enjoyed the most, is being able to role play individuals who are meeting people that up until this point in their lives they had always considered to be, made up.
So is in now that you've met him, is the Invisible Man's mad maniacal laugh as spooky as H.G. Wells wrote it?
Well, actually, I don't know that we ever got to hear his maniacal laugh. Not that I can recall, anyway.
Yeah. Mostly he just goes, "Oh crap," or the Victorian equivalent.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Oh crapeth. So.
Bloody hell.
Bloody hell. Yeah. So how, like, if somebody's hearing this and they're like, "Oh, that sounds really neat. I'd love to do Victorian era steampunk superheroes." Where's the best community right now for? I mean, is there? Do you see? Are there any particular forums or are there any Roll20 games or I mean, what would be your recommendation if people are looking to play Victorious?
I know there's some Roll20 games going on, but I cannot think of their actual address right now. But I'm sure you could just plug in Victorious and it will pop up. There's our main site at victoriousrpg.com.
Okay.
We have a Facebook page, Facebook group.
Right.
We have forums over at the Troll forums, at the Troll, connected to the Troller Games pages.
Are there any particular cons or regions where maybe the play seems to be picking up more than opposed to others? Like, obviously there's more than one Victorious game here at North Texas.
Right.
I know at Arkansas RPG Con, are y'all going to be at the next Arkansas RPG Con? Do you have
Not this year, because they moved it to November.
Oh, that's right.
We're already committed to Tyler Comic-Con. So.
Well, maybe with that being Troll Lord's stomping grounds, maybe we can get a game on the schedule for you. So
hopefully, there was some games of it at GaryCon this year too. Up in Lake Geneva.
My guess would be, you're running on an OSR rule set. I wouldn't necessarily say that the game itself is OSR, because it's kind of a new concept to me anyway. But my guess would be that any con that has sort of a strong OSR presence, you might have a pretty good chance of, because you got more chance of Troll Lord games, and that would be my guess. So, and my last question on this, and then feel free to add whatever you want. So you're running on the Sage engine, which is the engine that Castles of Crusades runs on. Mm-hmm. So, and that it's basically the D&D 3.5, but highly modified to where anything you want to do as an attribute check is one of the things that Steve always likes to talk about. So you don't have to have a hard and fast rule for anything. You just say, well, I want to try this, and say, well, what ability do you think applies to that, and let's go for it, kind of thing. Did you have the Sage engine in mind when you wrote Victorious? Okay, so it's a perfect fit. So you wrote it with the Sage engine in mind. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
I've actually known some people who have taken the skill system in Victorious and imported it in their Castles and Crusades games.
Oh, nice. Okay, so tell us. So tell us about the skill system. What's different?
Well, Victorious has a class system, like the Castles and Crusades system.
Right.
It also, however, the way it's set up, it allows some customization of the classes. And if you're really experienced with the system, you can build heroes from scratch if you don't want to use a class.
So it's okay. So you don't have to if you understand how.
Right.
Okay.
It's just the classes are there as a short form to get you playing quicker and to give you an idea what the archetypes are.
Okay. So kind of like, and I think this is correct, like in Shadowrun, you can build your own character, but they have this thing called a street samurai that they've already put everything together for. But you don't have to play a class, right? They just have these are pre-built templates if you want to go that route.
Right.
So, right. Okay. All right.
And the classes, I use very general skills. Showing my old school roots here, I really liked the secondary skills system in the first edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide.
Okay.
My favorite story is playing in a 2E game where I was playing an elf with tracking and had +2, or had specialized with her bow.
That's going to blow a lot of people's minds.
But she didn't have hunting. So she couldn't go in the woods and hunt.
Right.
Because she's an elf who lives in the frickin' woods who can track with a bow.
Right. So.
Oh, I hate that.
Right. Well, and that, it sounds, so you're talking to your skill system, but that also speaks to a strength of the Sage engine. You tell me what attribute you think applies, and let's go.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And if you have the skill, I list about 20 skills in there, and they're very general. Like a forester would be cover all the things you would do in a forest. If you have the skill, you can add your level to it. Doesn't mean if you don't have it, you can't do it. You just don't get to add your level. That's all. Right.
So having a skill just means you're proficient.
Right.
Right. But everybody can. Yeah.
Everybody can try anything.
Right.
It's
nice.
And to me, that's the big strength of the Siege engine system. Everybody goes, well, but you don't have all these abilities. And I'm like, sure you can. Just try it.
Right.
And they'll give you an attribute check and see if you can do it.
Right. You have an umbrella guide that tells you, use your creativity and common sense and go that direction.
Yep.
All right. So you got the skill system, and you said you've been working on some modules. And so, like, how many official, quote unquote, sort of modules and things are there out for Victorian?
We put out one, A Night for Jackals.
Okay.
It got misprinted as Night of the Jackals for some reason, but if you look on the inside, it's A Night for Jackals.
A Night for Jackals. All right. Does that involve Jack the Ripper?
Not exactly.
Okay.
It involves the hide formula and somebody's attempts to experiment with it in London, which causes some murders. So I suppose you could roll into that. Right now, I and my co-author, Charles Slayton, are coming up with a big 5-adventure supplement book for the World Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago.
Cool.
Where America's first serial killer was found.
I did not know that.
Dr. Mudgett. I mean, it sounds like James Bond, but this guy built a 3-story building hotel and filled it with secret chambers, asphyxiation rooms.
He was, yeah.
Shoots down to the basement where he had a crematorium.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah.
Now that I've heard of.
Okay, yeah, that's him.
Yeah, his
Mudgett.
real name was Mudgett, but he went by H.H. Holmes, which is how most people know of him.
I've heard of H.H. Holmes.
And he used the cover of the World Columbian Exposition to cover his killings.
There's some freaky people out there.
Yeah.
You'll.
And so our adventures all go around the fair. You know, we deal with everything from supervillains to anarchists to Mudgett, you know, and his nefariousness.
So have you had anybody ask, or if somebody came up and asked you how hard, like it, when a lot of people go Victorian, they want to go sort of in that Lovecraft direction. So
Cthulhu by Gaslight,
right?
One of the games we started with.
Exactly. So how, like, is there anything in here already? Like, is the ingredients here? If I wanted to go a little Cthulhu or Lovecraftian in here,
there's a section for various beasts of legend and such, and of course couldn't quite go full Lovecraft because at the time I wrote this, none of it was public domain yet.
Right.
But yes, you can ask Liz. I have quite a penchant of putting certain Cthulhuoid things in the games.
Yes, you do.
if I see one more tentacle, you're on the couch tonight, Buster.
Hey, nothing improves a game like a hunting horror. I mean, really.
Really.
Just
I mean,
awesome.
right?
They can hunt.
There's nothing like, setting out to do some superheroics and losing all sanity I understand.
End up at an asylum for criminally insane super beings. Where have we heard that before?
Arkham Asylum.
Yeah, that's got to be it.
Yeah, a lot of people probably have never made that connection with the Arkham. So yeah.
A brief plug for a friend of mine, Corbett Kirkley, in his Gagman podcast, put together an adventure for Victorious called A World Gone Mad. It's available on DriveThruRPG or on the Gagman podcast website. It is pay what you want.
Nice.
And it is a asylum of the criminally insane. So it's an adventure and it's a quick, collection of a dozen supervillains.
Right, which I love that kind of stuff. So, okay, well, any final thoughts, Mike? And then I'm going to move over to Liz on Victorious. Recommendations for, anything you'd want to say or not want to.
We have quick start rules on the website along with 3 PDF adventures for free. I strongly recommend download them. Give it a try.
And Liz is for free quick start stuff. She's begging you every day for more tentacled horror adventures, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she just won't be quiet about it.
Well,
I'm just going to have to make another one.
She told me yesterday her favorite scene you've ever GM'd was where she finally got to meet Sherlock Holmes, but then he, literally, his mouth opened and, this tentacle thing came out.
And like Goose in Captain Marvel.
Exactly. She said she'll never forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never.
And you see, that's what gaming's all about.
It is,
Giving those scenes you never forget, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah.
The scenes you never asked for.
It's a joy.
You need it.
RPGs are the gift that just keeps giving things you never knew you wanted. So, what about you, Liz? Any final thoughts on Victorious that you'd want to tell people?
Oh.
Oh, okay then. That's a quote.
She's still dealing with that sanity loss.
All she can see is the yeah. That's too funny. All right. So okay, and what's the name? Tell me about one of your characters, because you said you had some of the initials. Tell me, who's your favorite character that you like to play in Victorious?
Right now, my favorite changes from month to month. Right now, my favorite character is a contraptionist who goes by the name of Steel Angel, and the local newspapers, and was it the newspapers or was it the magazine The Strand that came up with the...
It was The Strand.
Yeah, the Strand magazine came up with the totally erroneous background that she is a lost princess of the undersea kingdom of Atlantis, and despite her trying to tell everyone that she's not, they are convinced that because it was in the Strand, it is true.
Well, you do protest too.
Apparently
too
so.
Much, I think.
Yeah.
So that's great.
So she's kind of like, if you're familiar with the Girl Genius webcomic by Phil and Kaja Folio.
Another good steampunk.
She's very much like Agatha Heterodyne, blonde, pretty, brilliant, likes to create things.
Snarky.
And so right now...
And also from Atlantis. I have that on good authority.
Oh, yes.
Everyone from Atlantis is snarky.
Everyone says so. So, yeah, right now she is my favorite.
Okay. Well, yeah, and that leads into the contraptionist is one of the classes. And as Mike pointed out earlier, you can come up with your own characters, but here's some pre-built classes for you. The hypnotist, the inquiry agent, no one expects the inquiry agent, the paragon, the radiant, the strong arm, and the vigilante. So those are some of the kind of classes that you can play. Well, this looks really fun. I hope for a chance to play it. I couldn't, my schedule wouldn't let me play it this weekend, but I do hope to play it. So maybe I can talk with Carl, and maybe we can get it on the schedule at Arkansas RPG Con. So and the other thing I wanted to talk with you all about to help get the word out, I wasn't even aware that you were doing this. You have the Save for Half podcast, a podcast about old school games, and it's saveforhalf.com. So what's that all about? How long have you been doing the podcast, and what was the inspiration, and what can people expect when they listen? And
well, we did the Save or Die podcast, which was about classic Dungeons and Dragons, for many, many years, and we love that. D&D is still always our first favorite.
You've been in the trenches.
But yeah, after several years, we parted ways with WGPN, the people who do Save or Die, and we wanted to cover other games as well. So we created the Save for Half podcast, which covers old school games and the modern games inspired by them. And we tend to cover old games back from the 70s, 80s, early 90s, but we've occasionally covered new games, new iterations.
Depending on the feel or the tone of the game.
For instance, we covered the original Top Secret, and then in one of our half shows where we do interviews and stuff, we covered Top Secret New World Order.
Which one of the vendors here has some really nice looking New World Order. They're like, the binding on them looks amazing.
Yeah, and we got to interview Merle Rasmussen about it. And we've covered other games like, we've covered D&D. Yes, we always love coming back to that, but we've also covered Traveler.
I'll tell you, I did a Traveler show, and that got a lot of attention. There's a lot of love for Traveler out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the little black book Traveler.
Yeah, the little black book. I know Traveler has an interesting history, multiple editions, but the original, and the name escapes me right now, he's kickstarting the original stuff, but in a larger book format. Yeah. He's got it might already be over, but he's putting out the original Traveler stuff, but it's in a larger format, bound book and all of that. So, yeah.
More durable, and let's face it, as we're getting older, we need bigger print.
We do need bigger print. Yeah, I love Traveler. That was, as I played Traveler, and I played I played a lot of Village of Vigilantes. and I dinkered around with D&D here and there, but D&D was not my first. Now, I got heavy into D&D at a certain point, but D&D was not my entry into role-playing games. So there's a lot of people, Traveler was their gateway.
And it's really interesting to notice the gaming style differences between people who started or didn't start with D&D. And that's why I think so many of these other games needed some coverage. We just covered the first edition of Champions a couple episodes ago.
Nice.
Victory Games is 007 RPG.
There's so much good stuff out there.
Some of them, just because it's out of print doesn't mean it's not a good game.
Well, the narrative, because memories are short and it's easier to come up with this consensual narrative. The narrative is you had D&D and then just a couple other role-playing games. There was so many other role-playing games out there. There really were. But D&D is the one that's always been big in pop culture and mainstream and all of that. So
it's kind of like for a while, soda, any type of soda was called a Coke.
I still say that in Arkansas.
Right, and a lot of people see that about RPGs and D&D.
They use D&D interchangeably. Yeah, in fact, I got in the elevator earlier today, and a guy who's not here with the convention was like, "Yeah, you having a good con or convention or whatever?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "So what is it? Is it Dungeons and Dragons?" I said, "Well, it's tabletop role playing in general." And then I thought, for him, that is D&D. So he probably didn't understand the distinction I was making. So
that's
yeah. So not because you can be very intelligent but be ignorant of something, right? And if you're not in the role playing world, you don't understand.
Right, it's not your bag. You don't know what's going on.
So what? Do you have any future guests coming up that you want to pump, or any interesting?
Well, we generally have Mike Bottolato on after every North Texas to do a wrap up. Last year we had him on as Satan, so that was.
He had him what?
Well, he does the Saturday night auctions.
I just see. Right.
So we advertised it with Satan.
Nice. Yeah. Now with more Satan, isn't that special?
Because back in the '80s there was the old Satanic Panic.
Sure. Yeah, the Satanic Panic, of course. Yeah.
Gotta laugh.
Yeah. So.
We've had John Peterson on, and we had. Lots of people. I can't think of anyone we're going to have specifically in the future. Usually we try to customize our guests with the game that we're planning on covering.
About. So, do you have any future games? Do you have a short list of games that you want to talk about?
We're planning on covering Star Frontiers sometime in the future.
That's an old favorite of mine.
We'd like to see about getting Zeb Cook on to talk about that.
Yeah, who just happens to be here, wandering around. North Texas is mind-blowing. It's just... it's not a huge con like Gen Con or something, but there's some really, within the industry, there's some really big names here, and everyone's just hanging out.
Yeah, we had Chris Holmes on to talk about his dad when we covered Holmes Space D&D, which is a fave because that's the game that got both Liz and I started individually on RPGs.
See, I was Moldvay, because it was Holmes, Moldvay, then Mincer, right?
Mincer,
Yeah, Moldvay BX was my first D&D, and then we were playing first edition AD&D and mixing it up with BX and not even we didn't even know
nobody cared.
Yeah, we
nobody
didn't know
thought
what the crap
about
we were doing.
That's that. Who never ran Keep on the Borderlands with AD&D?
Right.
I mean, come on.
It
always happens.
It was all interchangeable. We didn't. And now I look back and I'm like, how did we? Well, anyway, it worked. So we had fun. All right. Well, so what is the format like? Are you both just co-hosts, or what is the format of the show? What do each of you bring to the show?
Well, we currently have 4 hosts.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Liz and I, Jim Wampler, who's wandering
about,
and Corbett Kirkley, and we basically trade off each episode. We each choose a game to cover, which is why I can't give you a full list
I understand,
too far in advance. And I think I am reluctantly the lead host. Which mostly involves me introducing everyone and then trying to keep everyone on task.
Trying to keep the
gamers
together.
talking.
Yeah, we had. I was just on, and then I'll end here because you've already been gracious to give me almost an hour of your time, unless you want to add anything else. But
I think Liz could add her viewpoints on her part of the show.
Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead, and then I'll relate talking about things going off the rails. Yeah. So.
Well, I hate to sound so cliched as to say I give a female perspective.
But you give a female perspective.
But I do. Yeah. There's no getting around that.
Right.
I think I'm one of the few ladies in gaming that got into it on her own and was not brought in by a boyfriend or a husband or anything like that. So I think that in and of itself is something that's rather unique, and I just sort of muddled through on my own because I didn't know any other gamers. But
your cousins play.
Yeah, I forced my cousins to play.
Good for you.
Yeah, and none of them hate me, so it was a bonding experience.
I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Bless her heart.
Yeah. That just made, I don't know why, your t-shirt, for some reason, the font on it made me think of Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, which is probably one of my more favorite steampunk Victorian things, yeah.
Hand lettering.
Yeah.
This is my artwork, actually.
Oh, you
she
did
designed
that.
It.
Yeah. When Victorious was getting ready to go to Kickstarter,
Right.
I created a poster that we would be able to have at a table at cons to help promote the game that did not actually exist yet.
Right.
So,
that's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was free, so that made me a perfect artist for,
Yes,
the,
it's
for
like
the job.
your qualifications are you have the time to do it.
That's
So,
right. I have the
absolutely.
time, you don't have
But
to pay
it looks
me.
like you have skill, though. So, and did I not see online that you do some graphic design or something?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do graphic design, and the Victorious game has 4 supplements that go with the main rule book, and they've been reprinted since the initial Kickstarter.
Right.
The reprinted covers that have a parchment background and some 19th century looking typography treatment,
Right.
all 4 of those were designed by me for the new versions of the books. And I do some layout work too, not so much for Troll Lord games yet, but I've done some layout work for Frog God, and I did layout for Skeeter Green, his very first module on his own self-publishing.
Nice. Both names that the OSR world will recognize. So,
I was very pleased that Skeeter was willing to trust me with his firstborn child. So
right. Yeah, right. Yeah. And are you pleased with how it came out?
I am. It always looks a little different when you finally see it in print in front of you than it does digitally on the screen.
Right.
So you're never quite sure what you're going to see when it's in your hand.
Right.
But I am very pleased with how it turned out in the end.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Mike and Liz Stewart, thank you so much for your time. We've been talking about Victorious, which is a Victorian superhero role-playing game that is from Troll Lord Games and uses the Sage engine, and then also the Save for Half podcast. So go out there and check out the Save for Half. I assume it's iTunes. I mean, all the normal places. SaveForHalf.com. Okay. Well, how often does that come out?
Monthly. When we do have shows, it's twice a month.
Okay.
But
Nice.
generally at least once a month.
Well, thank you both. Is there any final thoughts or anything else you want? Anything profound for the ages that you want? I am Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, you mighty in despair.
I think I summed it up with my final thoughts on
Victorious
earlier.
I
So
thought it was amazing.
I got
It's
nothing
sublime.
left.
You're sublime, really.
Game on.
Game on. That's a great.
Game on.
That's a great place to end on. All right. So. All right. That's it for this week, party peoples and true believers and hoopy froods and all of that. Thanks again to Mike and Liz and to all the wonderful folks at North Texas RPG Con. I definitely plan on attending next year. So let's wrap up with the bad joke of the week. The Invisible Man and an Invisible Woman got married. Their kids were nothing to look at. We'll catch you next week on Shane Plays.
All right, you fools. You've brought it on yourselves. Everything would have come right if you'd only left me alone. You've driven me near madness with your peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it. You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. There's a souvenir for you. And one for you. I'll show you who I am and what I am. How do you like that, eh?
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.